Good morning, everyone. I'm BJ. I'm the genealogy specialist at the Maine State Library. And today I'm going to talk about reading old documents. And this is part 2. I will link to part 1 in the notes when this is on YouTube. So today I'm going to start with talking a bit about transcribing a document and how to do that, because that's often the best way to really read the document, is to write it out in your own handwriting. And there are a couple reasons for this. One is, if it's a difficult document to read, you now have a copy that is legible. It forces you to pay attention to details. And it also means that, especially if you're working from an original, you then can work with your transcript instead of with the original document. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to choose a document that I know exists. So that's not it. There we go. So this is a will from 1699. Actually, it's an entire probate file. And this, where is the handwritten will? Huh. Well, what did I say about today being quite the day? Here we go. And we'll get rid of this because we don't need it. Now, the first thing I do is, and this is for those of you who've wondered why I like having 2 screens. If I were doing this without having you guys on one screen, I would put the Word document or the Google Docs on one screen and this in the other. There are a couple ways to do this. There are various forms of transcribing that have names and details about how you do things. I've sort of simplified how I do it for my personal work, as opposed to when I'm doing it for something else, someone I'm working with or so on. So some basic things you want to do. You want to transcribe what's exactly there. So that means that if there's an abbreviation, you're going to put the abbreviation in the transcript. You're also going, the best thing to do is just transcribe it line by line. In other words, have the lines say exactly what they say in the document, and have the line breaks where the document has them. I'm not going to do it on this because of lack of screen space. I often end up turning the paper to, where is it? To landscape instead of portrait, because it gives you more room to work. And it's worth, on something like this, if I was doing it for myself, I'm not sure I would number the lines. But often what people do is they number the lines so that if you have notes, you can put them at the bottom saying, you know, line 1 or line 7. When I do that, I often insert a table that is 2 by however many lines, and then I move the margin so that I can do 1, 2, 3. And let me go back to the home. And I'm going to make this so you have some chance of reading it. You can make, if you do this, you can make the lines not show, but it also can be helpful to have them so that you're doing it in the boxes. The other way to do it is I set the paragraph to 1.5 or 2 lines, so that if I do 1 and 2, 3, there's space in between them. Especially if it's something I'm going to struggle with, a really older document. I leave plenty of room for me to print out if I haven't gotten everything. If there are words I haven't gotten, I print it out. I want to be able to print it out and work with it with room to make notes. So the biggest thing is you want, when you're transcribing, and the difference between a transcription and an abstract is the abstract, you're taking out just the information you need, or just the important information. So you're doing things like skipping the boilerplate in the name of God ain't men. You would just say Zebulon Hill, Salem, Essex, Massachusetts Bay. Whereas with the transcript, I'm going to have all of that. Does that make sense? The difference between the two? You know, there's some documents that an abstract is fine, but when you're getting into something that is harder to read, it's helpful to be able to do the entire transcript. So this is relatively easy to read as it goes. So, you know, here I would type and notice that I'm typing just as it is. Now, one of the issues, oops, I have a typo. Is that many computers don't have the thorn for this word. So at the moment, what I'm going to do, and I lost my cursor, there it is. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to superscript the E, because it is superscripted here. And if I have a character that I need to go back and insert, I'll make it red so that I know I need to go back to it. And you'll see when a new line starts, and if I ever learned to type, we'd be in much. So again, I'm going to make it red, and I'm going to superscript the E. And actually, that can be black again. So that's obviously clear. So let's go down here. So we've got line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is line 6. So let's say you didn't know what this word is. And so what I would do there, if I couldn't read it at all, I'd take a guess at how many letters it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I put the square brackets around it. Let's say I could figure out the first 2 letters and not the rest of the word. I would put that what I could figure out in the brackets. And let's say I figured that out, and I figured out that it was an S at the end. And so the square brackets are an indication that it's not fully worked out. It's also where if you expand out an abbreviation, you can put the abbreviation and then put the expansion in the square brackets, or you could do, let's say you have notes at the bottom. And you could put something down here, like let's say someone had written William. You could do this. And so some of this is dealing with you can figure out your own system to some extent. There's another place down here where it mentions Philip Hill. And so I might put in the notes for whatever, I'm going to make up a line number. If I know who Philip Hill is, I might say, in this case, it's his son, but I might say brother, as a note to myself that I know who this person is in this context. So basically, you would, here where it says hoping with an E, I would write that out. I will warn you that Word does not like 17th century spellings. So you will end up with a whole lot of things that have a red line under it. But basically you want to do it exactly like it's there. And indicate when you've changed something. I know people who will do, square brackets is often the sign you've added something. I know people who, when they've got this kind of situation where they can't read it, will do other brackets to leave the square brackets as the, I'm expanding on an abbreviation, or inserting letters that aren't there, but that I know should have been. So a lot of it is working out your own system. But the big things are to stick to what's actually there, and make it easy to figure out where you are in the document, and line numbers is the best way to do that. So if I were actually doing a transcription of this, I would have printed out a copy of it and actually labeled the lines with their numbers on the copy. Actually, I would have printed out 2 copies, a clean one to put in my folder about this person, and then a second one to work from for the transcription. If it's really difficult, I may actually print out 3. So there's one in the folder, one where I've just labeled the lines and kept the rest of it clean, and a third one where I do things like highlight the words that I don't understand, so I know where I need to go back to them. I tend to think that in the overall cost of our entire hobby, an extra few printouts is a lot less than the frustration of not finding something in a will because you haven't really analyzed it carefully. Does that make sense? That, you know, the extra copy is pretty minimal. But the big reason to actually transcribe a document is to make sure that you're really finding all of the information that's in it, that you're not letting your eyes glaze over something because you're not able to immediately figure out what it says. So I'd encourage all of you to take a document you've got from your files and try the process of transcribing, and see how, you know, particularly something for where you're working on a family because you're stuck somewhere, you know, take a will and really transcribe it and make sure you got everything out of it. As I said, there are styles that are done for serious research with names like diplomatic and semi-diplomatic transcription. And so you can find guides to how to do it online. But from this, what I've showed you as a way to do it will get you through what you need for your personal research. But as I said, one of the things people starting out tend to do is to write it the way we would write it if we were just doing our own document. And this breaking it down by line is really helpful in terms of figuring out what you've already done in the document and being able to go through and look at what you've already done, and come back to it 3 days later with the stuff that you haven't done, and to figure out where you need to do more work. Because obviously in this case, I've skipped these 3 lines. And it might be that if I'm really, you know, if I'm looking at something, you know, let's say I'm on a research trip and I'm in a hotel overnight, I may actually put in, and I have done this, it's not the best practice, but I would then in here, I might write boilerplate, oops, and make it italic, and we'll make it green. And so then when I got home after the research trip, I would go back and do this. But you know, if I'm on a research trip and I found this, I may want to get to the meat of the information in case there's something I need to change on the second day of the research trip. But I would do this so I know that it's something that I'm going to come back to, and it's just this sort of standard wording about, you know, being aged and infirm, of body, yet of perfect mind and memory, that doesn't make any difference in my research, but I would eventually want it in the transcription. Does that make sense? How I, sometimes on that, I will skip into the where are the names and the relationships that I may need on the research trip. So that's a 20-minute introduction to how to transcribe something. It's not that difficult once you start doing it, but I would encourage you on families that you're really searching to take some time to do a couple documents. Wills are the really big ones that I do most often. Deeds often just don't have enough, you don't, unless you're looking for the neighbors and other details of the land, it later gets split or something among two kids. You don't necessarily always need to do a deed, but I find that I try to do it for wills, just because even as a fairly experienced researcher, more than half the time, I notice something, or around half the time, I notice something in the will as I'm transcribing it that I had not noticed just reading it. Does that make sense as to why you would find things as you're transcribing that your eyes sort of glazed over when you were just reading it? So, so that's the brief introduction to transcription. The best way to get good at it is to practice. And so, I would encourage you to practice with documents that are actually relevant to your research. There are places online where there are samples you can use that there is a transcription for already. So let me show you one. Oops. Let's see. There's a website called Scottish Handwriting. The National Archives of the UK has a really good section on paleography with samples. What I'm going to show you now is, this is the Board of Certification for Genealogy, and they've got 3 documents here where they have the document and then they have the transcription they did and then the abstract. So if you want to do one where you can look at something and check your work, you can do that. Let's go to the National Archives. They've got 2 sets here. They've got a tutorial where it starts out with the easiest and works up to the hardest. So if we look here, it's got about the document, some tips for just transcribing it, then IT doesn't let us have Flash Player. So, and here's a printable version of the document that you can print and transcribe. And here, here are some tips on how to do this particular one, some words that, an explanation. They give you a bit of the alphabet that's used in this, and then you would print this out, and you'll see how it's got the line numbers, and here they've put it on each side. And this is actually a fairly easy one to read. It's fairly clear. But they also have, in addition to those 10, they have a bunch of others here that you can go in and take a look at. And again, they give you some really good information about what's in the document, and so on. So if this is some, if you struggle with reading old handwriting, those two sources are good places to go. So let me stop sharing this screen. So any questions at this point?
BJ, I'll throw out a comment. I just sent you a paper, a copy of a message I sent to Rhonda McClure of NEHGS. She made a presentation on Portuguese genealogy, and I sent her a copy of my great-great-great-grandfather's baptismal certificate, which was impossible to read. Thanks to the archivist, in the Azores, he was able to help me transcribe it. And then there's a translation and all that. So you have it there someplace.
Okay, good.
You don't have to share it, but there it is.
Yeah, and that's one thing to remember is if you're looking at things that aren't English, the alphabet and the handwriting are going to be different. So you would want to, instead of using the National Archives of England website, you would want to Google Portuguese paleography or Italian paleography and find those for the samples of what you would be looking at alphabet-wise and all of that. Because the handwriting will differ in some fairly consistent ways. Any other questions? Okay, so at this point, I'm going to start chatting and just do brief beginning on this. On looking at, come on, some of the other details you need to know in order to read a document well. It's sometimes hard, you have issues with dates and currencies and such that can make it hard to understand what you're looking at. So let's talk about calendars for a minute. Mostly we're going to talk about the English-speaking world, where in 1752, England and the areas it controlled, including the American colonies, went from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian. And basically what happens is, because the solar year is not exactly 365 days, it's 365 and a quarter days. The calendar for the Julian calendar was not accounting well for that extra quarter day, and things were getting out of sync. The extreme on that is a lunar calendar rather than a solar calendar, which is what the Arabic or Muslim calendar is, which is why, for example, Ramadan circles all through the year, is it's following a lunar calendar without any correction to a solar year. The Jewish or Hebrew calendar is a combination of lunar and solar. And so the reason you get holidays in Judaism varying according to the Gregorian calendar is that has some built-in safeguards, so the spring holidays stay in the spring and the fall holidays stay in the fall, but that it's partly lunar so that you have some change that way. What it does is, for some, I forget, I think it's every 9 out of 17 years, or maybe it's 7 out of 19 years. It's one of those. There's an extra month to keep the calendar going for, as I said, keeping the spring holidays in the spring. So anyhow, in 1752, in the American colonies, as well as in the British Isles, you went from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. And this meant two things changed. Wednesday, September 2nd was followed by Thursday, September 14th. And they also changed the start of the year from Lady Day, which was March 25th. So March was regarded as the first month of the year, to starting on January 1st as New Year's Day. So it was a short year to make up for that. Eastern Europe didn't change until much later. So in Alaska, when it was taken over by the US, as you can see, in 1867, Friday, October 6th was followed by Friday, October 18th. And again, you see there's it's 12 days instead of actually, no, it is the same number of days. But if you ever wondered why you've sometimes seen February 11th and February 22nd as George Washington's birthday, it's because of this calendar change. And this is also why you will see things with a double date before this for January and February, because for some years they did actually, and some clerks would have written, for January 7th, 1705/6. The 6 is the year that we would put it in. The 5 is the year that the old system starting on, let me get,
Can I ask a question on going back to that calendar or the thing you had up, where
yeah,
September 2nd. So I'm confused. So what happened to September 3rd through the 13th? I mean,
they didn't exist that year.
okay.
They just, but at least it wasn't like in Alaska where you had 2 Fridays in a row one year as they dealt with changing the calendar.
TGIF.
Yeah. So yeah, and here's the difference. In Scotland, they started doing New Year's Day on January 1st in 1600, but they didn't start doing it in England until 1752. And so you get issues where things come out of London one way and end up in Scotland the other way. And here you see one where you have February the 19th, 1734/5. And this was the way of showing, this is the old style and this is the new style date. And a lot of genealogy programs don't like this. They will, even if you enter this way, they will just convert it to the new style. And so you want to be aware on those. But sometimes they would not have bothered to do that. You know, some clerks didn't do this. They would have just put 1734 here. And so you would want to look and see. So if you have cases where things look weird, somebody being born before parents are married, but it says the parents are married, this may be what the issue is. Does that make sense? As how that could, if somebody got married in March of one year and had the baby the next, you may get some funny things. Or if you've got siblings that look like they're too close together in birth, it might be this, and this confuses a lot of people. So often I find things that online should be 1735 that someone has taken that as 1734. And if you remember last week, it turned out it was the September one was a mistranscription with the 1711 versus 12. But I've also seen cases where it's a January or February date and things seem to be weird because of that. And you're getting babies that look like they're too close together, but it turns out that it should have been 1735, not 1734, because you can't have somebody born in, if a mother gives birth in October of 1743, she's also not going to have a baby in February of 1734, but she's quite likely to have one in 1735 in February. And so if somebody has taken this, either taken this and transcribed it as the 4, or it was just there as 1734 and they didn't realize it should be 5 this way, you may get what it looks like kids born 3 or 4 months apart.
DJ?
Yeah.
So that's 1734/5. And England went from Julian to Gregorian to 1752. So when did the US change?
1752 as well, because it was still a British colony.
So, but this is 1734.
Which is before 1752.
Right.
So this is on the Julian calendar, and it's counting the year from March, not January. So by their reckoning, February was the 12th month of 1734. And by the new style reckoning, which wasn't official yet, but some people were beginning to do it, it was the second month of 1735.
Okay, thank you.
Basically, you're just you're pushing everything 2 months later. And they, even though Lady Day, that was supposedly the start of the year, was March 25th, they count all of March as the first month of the year.
That was my question.
Yeah, it's confusing. Does that make sense, though?
Mm-hmm.
That you're basically taking, picture those like color wheels or the astronomy things that are on a wheel inside a double sheet of paper, and just turn it 2 months. So, okay, so let me stop sharing at this point. Yeah, the American colonies went at the same time as the UK, or as England did, which would be 1752. Because remember, at that point, the American colonies were part of England. And that's what, now if you remember, and part of the issue is, if I go back to, France went to the Gregorian calendar in 1582. So they were on the Gregorian calendar before any settlement started in what's now Quebec. And so you're going to get things from early Quebec that are Gregorian. Well, the American colony, the British colonies were still Julian. So yeah, it's tough. Whereas if you're dealing with Eastern European stuff, those countries actually didn't change until right around the time of World War I. Russia, Latvia, Lithuania, that area. So, there are stories of into the modern era where people forgot and, arrived places like the Olympics too late or way too early.
On the chart before, did it show Prussia was in the 1600s?
Yeah, 1610.
That it had the Gregorian.
That made the change. Other parts of Germany had already made it in the late 1500s, and then Prussia did in 1610.
BJ, I'm very new at this, as you know, but I have a question about when you're looking at ancestry or family heritage or any of those, are those dates already figured as if it was prior or if it was later than 1752?
No, they when they have some, when you get that page that's the transcription, they are going by the calendar that the document, they are transcribing the date as it is in the document. Okay, so for England before 1752, the American colonies before 1752, it's the old style date.
Okay, thank you.
And yet that document you had that was 1734/5, obviously that was originally written
yeah,
before 1752, but obviously they were aware of the change coming.
Right, and yeah, they knew, and so they, because enough of the Western Europe had changed, but not all clerks will have done that. That one did, which is why I pulled it up, but I've seen it. I'd say maybe a quarter to a third of clerks did it from 1700 to 1752. You see that double dating, which is nice. but often you can tell because you can look and you can see that there's a heading for, like, here's where 1734 records start, and you'll see that they start in March and that January and February are at the end. So that's all I'm going to do for today, because I know that it's kind of information overload at this point. And so next week I'll start up with some more about calendars and then some of the other stuff, and maybe do some more with showing you some of the old style handwriting and how to read it. Okay, but the calendar thing, it takes a while to wrap your head around it. I know. It took me a long time. So that's, but you know, I've also seen clerks write OS or NS for old style or new style. But yeah, try transcribing something if you have a chance between now and next week. Just because that way you can, if you have questions, you'll have a time to ask them next week after having tried to do it. You don't have to choose something long, but you choose an ancestor's will and just try the doing it line by line, because it does take some time to remember to do that. And I would highly encourage you to try it. Okay? Yeah, the map one is the one I did for the librarians. But I haven't done it for the Genealogy Club online yet. I did it in person like a year and a half ago, but some things have changed and I figured I would do it again. First of all, there are a bunch of you who weren't coming to the Genealogy Club, so you haven't seen it. And on some of these, it's one thing to sit in the studio at the library, and it's another to have your computer here when you're at home and you can actually follow along as I'm doing it. Because it'll just, there's some really neat stuff, and so I want to do it for those of you who haven't seen it. There's some really fun map stuff out there. Okay. So, well, thanks for joining me. I'm going to turn off the recording now.